Have you ever felt like you didn't belong? Like you were just a burden to those around you? And then one day, someone walks into your life, not with grand promises or loud declarations, but with quiet presence, and somehow they begin to piece you back together. Today, I want to tell you a story just like that. A story about a girl who was seen as worthless, thrown away by the very people who were supposed to love her, only to find something greater in the most unexpected place. So come with me to a little village tucked away in the peaceful countryside of Tennessee, where golden wheat fields stretch under the sunset, and the story of Ellie begins. That story begins on a quiet winter night in a sleepy Tennessee village. The golden wheat fields lay bare beneath a slate-gray sky, and cold wind swept across the edges of the woods where an old wooden cabin stood alone, creaking with each gust. Inside, a newborn's fragile cry echoed, a tiny sound of life breaking through silence. The young mother had passed away in childbirth. The midwife, hands trembling and heart heavy, looked down at the baby swaddled in a frayed blanket. No one knew who the father was. No one came asking. The baby was already alone in the world. Just then, the door creaked open. A woman stepped in, Miss Carroll, a stern-faced widow known throughout the village for her unbending strength. She looked at the crying child, not with fear but quiet resolve. "Give me the baby," she said, voice calm but certain. "But you already have, Heather," the midwife whispered. "Another child, another burden." I said, "Give her to me." And so, without another word, the child was placed in Miss Carroll's arms. She named her Ellie, held her close to her chest, and took her home, never realizing that this tiny life would someday test the deepest corners of her heart and rewrite the fate of them all. Ellie grew up in Miss Carroll's modest home alongside her biological daughter, Heather. To the outside world, they looked like a normal little family. But behind that weathered wooden door, things were far from equal. Heather was the golden child, dressed in the finest hand-sewn dresses, fed the best cuts of meat, kissed on the forehead each night. And Ellie, the girl with the soft brown curls and soulful eyes, was always the last one cleaning up, folding laundry and carrying the weight of the household on her slender shoulders. Miss Carroll never hit her, never shouted, but it was in the way she looked at Ellie, cold, distant, like she was a guest, like she didn't belong. As Ellie grew older, her beauty bloomed quietly, effortlessly. Her sun-kissed skin glowed like golden syrup, her long hair flowed like silk, and her gentle smile could soften the hardest hearts. People in the village began to notice, more than notice. And Heather noticed too. The boys who once trailed behind Heather now turned their heads for Ellie. Even the son of the wealthiest rancher in town, the one Heather secretly dreamed of, couldn't hide his admiration whenever Ellie walked by. That was the moment envy crept into Heather's heart, silent at first, like a whisper in the wind, but growing stronger with every glance, every compliment not meant for her. It was late evening when the house grew quiet and the kitchen lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. Ellie was still outside, kneeling by the well, scrubbing muddy linens in a cold basin. Her hands were raw, her sleeves soaked. Just as she wrung out the last rag, she heard soft laughter and whispered voices coming from inside. She crept closer, her bare feet silent on the wooden porch. Pressing herself against the wall, she froze when she recognized the voices. Heather and Miss Carroll. "I don't understand why you keep her," Heather said, her tone sharp beneath the whisper. "She's not family, doesn't even look like us. Keeping her around is like hanging onto a broken chair." "I know," Miss Carroll replied, sighing. "I should have left her that night. I took her in out of guilt, not love. She was never meant to stay." Ellie's stomach twisted. The words sliced through her like a blade. Her legs wobbled, her breath caught. All these years, had it all been a lie? She stumbled backward, clutching the wet cloth against her chest like a shield. Her world, what little security she thought she had, shattered quietly in the shadows. After that night, things were no longer hidden. No more polite silence. Miss Carroll stopped pretending. Ellie was no longer daughter, no longer anything at all. She ate scraps, slept by the fireplace, and worked harder than ever. while Heather basked in comfort and pride. Then, one morning, Miss Carroll called Ellie outside. The sky was pale, wind dancing through the tall wheat. "You're getting married," she said bluntly, like she was announcing the weather. Ellie blinked. "Married? To who?" "Jake. That boy who lives past the woods, in that half-fallen cabin." He agreed. Ellie's heart dropped. Everyone knew Jake. Poor, quiet, invisible. He lived alone and kept to himself. People whispered he was strange, useless, a ghost of the village. "Mom, please don't do this," Ellie whispered, tears forming. Miss Carroll grabbed her arm tightly. "Don't call me that. I'm not your mother. You were never my responsibility. You'll marry Jake tomorrow, and you'll leave my house for good." From the doorway, Heather stood watching, arms folded, smiling faintly, like she'd finally gotten rid of an old stain on her perfect life. The next day, Ellie left the house that had once been her whole world. No wedding dress, no guests, no blessings. Just a cloth bag holding a few old belongings and heavy steps leading her toward a small wooden cabin at the edge of the forest. Jake was waiting on the porch. He stood quietly under the faded roof, his expression unreadable. Not harsh, not cold, just distant and still. The house was just like everyone in the village said: leaking roof, creaky door, a wobbly table, a single wooden bed, and an old rug rolled up in the corner. "This is your home now," Jake said, his voice low, steady, without emotion. Ellie didn't respond. She only nodded, glancing around, her hand clutching the strap of her bag. In her mind, this would be the place where she'd be rejected all over again. But instead, the first thing Jake did was unroll the rug on the floor and point to it. "You can sleep here." No touching, no forcing, no unkind words. Ellie froze. That night, lying on the floor of a stranger's home, she curled into herself, silent tears slipping onto her pillow. Jake didn't touch her. He didn't even face her. He lay on the bed across the room, turned away, quiet and distant. The next morning, a soft knock at the door woke her. Jake had returned from somewhere with dry bread and a few wild apples. He didn't say much, but when her stomach growled loudly in the quiet, he placed the food beside her without a word. "Eat," he said. "What about you?" she whispered. "I already ate." But Ellie noticed there was no second plate. Jake had given her the only food he had. Something stirred quietly in her chest, a small, unfamiliar ache. Not love, not yet, but something real, something kind. No one had ever done something for her without wanting something back. No one had ever looked at her like she mattered. That night, Jake again said nothing, but just before turning out the lamp, he walked over and gently laid a thin blanket over her body. Ellie opened her eyes in the dark, tears rising again. Not from sadness this time, but because, maybe for the first time in her life, she wasn't completely alone. The first few days passed quietly, like a still lake untouched by wind. Ellie and Jake barely spoke. He, by nature, was used to silence. They lived under the same roof, yet moved like shadows around each other. One cooked, the other chopped wood. One went to market, the other lit the fire. No one invaded the other's space. But unlike anyone Ellie had lived with before, Jake never looked down on her. He didn't command, didn't complain, didn't stare with judgment, and that quiet was what caught her attention the most. One afternoon, Ellie returned from the market, arms full of vegetables and firewood. Rain had begun to fall, turning the path into soft mud. Just as she stepped onto the porch, she tripped. Everything spilled across the ground. The wood scattered. Vegetables rolled into the dirt. A few neighbors nearby snickered. "Jake's wife, huh? Look at her, useless as they come." Ellie said nothing. She kept her head low, lips pressed tight. She bent down and began gathering everything, hands trembling as rain and tears mixed on her cheeks. Then a hand reached out, firm, gentle. "Jake." Without a word, he knelt beside her and helped collect the mess. He didn't scold, he didn't pity, he simply helped. Later that evening, as they dried off inside, Ellie looked at him. Really looked at him. "Why aren't you like the others?" she asked softly. Jake met her gaze, his eyes deep and quiet. "Because I know what it feels like, to be seen as nothing." He didn't say much, just fragments. A life once filled with rejection, laughter behind his back, silence that lasted for years, being forgotten, being nobody. Ellie sat still, his words echoing through her like ripples across water. For so long she had believed pain belonged only to her, but now? The man before her wore the same invisible scars. She reached out and gently touched his hand. Jake froze, surprised. "You're not worthless," she whispered. "You're the first person who's ever made me feel like I mattered." He didn't speak, but he held her hand, firmly, slowly, like it meant everything. And in that small, quiet moment, two forgotten souls finally found one another. Time passed, and between sunlit mornings and rainy afternoons, Ellie slowly grew accustomed to life with Jake. They didn't talk much, but there was something in the way he moved, the way he noticed small things, that began to soften her. Each morning Jake chopped wood, she cooked. Each night they sat beneath the porch, watching stars flicker above the trees. The silence between them no longer felt heavy. It became peaceful, like a quiet understanding spoken without words. Until one afternoon. Jake returned home, his clothes dusty, a canvas bag slung over his shoulder like he'd traveled far. He set it down, looked at her, and said simply, "Come with me." Ellie blinked. "Where?" He didn't answer, just motioned. Heart thudding with nervous curiosity, she followed. They crossed wheat fields and winding paths Ellie had never walked before. As the sun began to dip, casting gold across the hills, they reached a large iron gate, tall, ornate, like the entrance to another world. "Where are we?" she whispered. Jake didn't reply. He pushed the gate open. And there it was. A mansion. Tall red roofs, perfect rows of trees, golden light pouring from grand windows, a home from someone else's dream. Ellie stood frozen. "Jake, what is this?" He turned to her, eyes calm, voice steady. "This is my home." She shook her head in disbelief. "But you're poor." Jake smiled genuinely for the first time. "No, Ellie, I just let people think that." Her breath caught. "You lied to me?" Jake stepped closer. "I needed to know if someone could love me for who I am, not for what I own." Ellie's heart sank. All those nights hungry, all those days in silence, were they just part of a test? Her voice trembled. "You let me believe we had nothing." Jake said nothing. Ellie looked away, eyes stinging. "I need time." And for the first time since they met, she walked away from him. The sky darkened as Ellie walked in silence. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She wasn't sure where she was going. All she knew was that her heart felt stretched to the point of breaking. She had believed Jake was the one person who had never hidden anything from her. And yet, he had a whole other life, one he never let her see. Before she realized it, her feet had taken her to a place she hadn't intended to return to. Miss Carroll's house. She stood there, hand trembling as she knocked. After a moment, the door swung open. Heather stood there, dressed in her usual finery, surprise flickering in her eyes before it shifted into a smug grin. "Well, well," she sneered, "look who came crawling back." Ellie drew a shaky breath. "I'm not here to stay," she said calmly. "I just needed a little quiet." Heather laughed. "Quiet? Here? Did you forget who you are?" Ellie met her gaze, voice steady. "I used to be no one, but I'm not that girl anymore. I just wanted to know, why did you never love me?" Heather hesitated, but before she could respond, footsteps approached from behind. Miss Carroll appeared, leaning on her cane, face weathered but eyes still sharp. "Because you were never mine," she said flatly. Ellie nodded. She had known that for a long time, but for the first time, hearing it didn't hurt. "Then I won't ask to be loved anymore," she said softly. "I just came to say, I forgive you." Both Heather and Miss Carroll froze. Ellie smiled faintly, her voice calm. "I don't need your love anymore. I found it. In the one place you used to laugh at." And with that, she turned and walked away. That night, Ellie returned to the mansion, not quite sure if it was still her home. Her heart pounded as she stepped through the iron gates where Jake stood waiting under the soft glow of the porch light. He didn't say anything, just looked at her. In his eyes was worry, hope, and something she hadn't expected: quiet devotion. "I was wrong," Jake said gently. "I should have trusted you from the beginning." "I understand now," Ellie replied. "You just wanted to be loved for who you are. And me? I guess I did too. And now I know my place is with you." She reached out and took his hand. For the first time since they married, there was no space between them. That night, Jake didn't unroll the rug on the floor like he used to. Instead, he lifted the covers of the bed and glanced at Ellie, silently asking. She didn't speak, just walked over, climbed into bed beside him. There was no rush, no hunger, just two people, once discarded by the world, now reaching for each other, not with words, but with heart. In the quiet of the night, when fingers found fingers, when breaths aligned and the silence between them melted away, Ellie knew this wasn't just a moment of intimacy. It was the beginning of something real. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the curtains. Ellie awoke in Jake's arms, her head resting on his chest. His heartbeat was slow, steady, like home. Neither of them spoke, but everything had changed. A month later, Jake brought Ellie into the garden, where wild flowers bloomed beneath the spring sun. He knelt, not out of duty this time, but out of love. In his hand was a small ring. "Ellie," he said, "we were forced into marriage once, but today I want to choose you. Will you marry me again, this time with your heart?" Tears fell as Ellie smiled and nodded. "I've always chosen you." That night, Ellie returned to the mansion in silence. She wasn't sure if Jake would still want to see her. She wasn't sure if her heart was fully ready to forgive. But one thing she knew: she didn't want to lose another chance at love. Jake was already waiting at the gate. He didn't speak, just stood under the warm glow of the porch light, eyes full of worry, not blame, not anger, just hope. "You shouldn't have hidden it from me," Ellie said softly as she stepped closer. "I know," Jake replied, his voice low. "But I understand now. You just wanted to be loved, as a person, not a wallet." Jake nodded. "And me, I don't know when I started loving you, but I know this. If I walk away now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Jake stepped forward, gently took her hand. "I don't need anyone else," he whispered. "Only you." They embraced, no grand gestures, no speeches, just two hearts that had once been broken, finally finding each other whole. Months later, Ellie and Jake held a small ceremony, not to redo their wedding, but to choose each other freely, with no pressure, no secrets, just love. Jake knelt again, this time holding a simple ring. "Ellie," he said, "we didn't choose each other the first time, but today I want to. I choose you, once and forever. Will you marry me again?" Tears rolled down Ellie's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. And this time, it was love, pure and true. As I share this story with you, I don't just want you to remember Jake and Ellie. I want you to remember this. Sometimes we need to be thrown away so we can find where we truly belong. Never believe you are unworthy of love, because sometimes, in the very moment you feel invisible, someone out there is quietly seeing your worth. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next story here on No Stories. Thank you for listening. You are always worthy of love.